notebooks, full of plans, sketches, and grand designs.
If that sounded suspiciously like Tilda Swinton doing the introduction, that's because it was supposed to. But of course, it was not Tilda Swinton. That was AI Tilda Swinton. And to understand how we got to the point where an artificial construct of Tilda Swinton was introducing this video, we're going to have to talk about notebooks. So notebooks. Any decent artist has a pile of notebooks, and I'm no different. I've got them everywhere over here. And not only do I have my own notebooks, but I'm so fascinated with the artistic process that I collect the notebooks of other artists. Here's just a small sampling as Stephen Hull, the architect. This by Terry Gilliam, the genius director from Had to Start with Monty Python as an animator. Sabrina Ward Harrison, whose art resembles notebooks, and she will come up later in this video. Guillermo del Toro, who's an absolute hero of mine, and Leonardo da Vinci, who is no slouch in the notebook department. So I tend to find notebooks a little bit intimidating, and the reason for that is on any given page of my notebooks, you might have an idea that, if realized properly, could take 10 years of exacting labor. And when you realize that some pages have more than one of those ideas on them, and then you start multiplying the number of pages with the number of notebooks, and you could see why this might cause a measure of anxiety. I'm resigned to the fact that I simply will not have enough time in this lifetime to get to all of my ideas. Because I'm always generating new ideas, I tend to fill these books up and then move on, simply because there's more material coming through. So today we're going to concern ourselves with this particular notebook of mine, which I'll just call the Black Notebook, and I've had for a very long time, at least college. The contents of this book vary wildly. It's UFO research that I sat in with John Mack. Then there are lists of books that I want to read, notes on the books that I did read. Here's Oceans of Sound by David Toop and the notes I took on that. Music that I want to listen to, films that I want to watch, notes on those things, lyrics, project ideas, song ideas, album sequences, art projects, visual art, an idea for a book that I still have in play, an idea for a comic book. To make a long story short, there's a lot of different kinds of material in here. And this week's experiment involves me going back in here to reevaluate and reconsider the ideas that I had, and to reappraise them and just reacquaint myself with what's in this book. And also to see if there's some idea that is short enough that I can sort of execute it as an example for this week. So essentially it's sort of like, leave no idea behind. I'm going to go back and I'm going to rescue one of these guys. Okay, so here's how it went down. I went through the book, and true to form, there were quite a few ideas in it, and I whittled it down to one of two. One thing was I found two poems that were just labeled as two related poems from LA with no date, and one of them, the first, looked promising. And the second thing was kind of a multi-layered opening chord for an elaborate guitar piece that would pan all around one's head and surround sound. And I thought, well, I could probably just, get the chord done, but not the whole piece. For that reason, possibly I chose the poem because, it's a work unto itself as opposed to a piece of something else that's larger and something that I could actually get done in a few hours. So I chose the poem. Now is when it comes time to talk about kind of the labyrinthine process by which the rest of this happened. As I was going through the book, as I often do, I was listening to music because I have very few chances to listen to music while I'm actually writing music. That's an occupational hazard. And in the case of the music I was listening to, it was a piece called Sleep by Max Richter. But as it turns out, it must have sunk in because at some point going through this, I thought, oh, didn't he have a piece or an album called The Blue Notebooks? And wasn't Tilda Swinton narrating over his music? I'm starting now to formulate the idea, well, maybe I could take this poem and do a musical treatment along the lines of Max Richter underneath, and maybe get an AI Tilda Swinton to read my poem. And I sat down at the piano and came up with something that was on the along the lines of something that he might do, kind of a minimalist series of arpeggiated chords. Hint also of, the Moonlight Sonata, of course. And there's something else I brought into it intentionally, and that is normally I record to a click track. That's so it makes editing things easier later on, because if you don't play to a click, then you're trying to edit notes without measure lines or bar lines, and it gets super messy. But as this was poetry, I wanted to do the music part in the same way that I write poetry and also create my collages. That is to say, when I write a poem, it tends to be one and done. I write it and I walk away. There's either very little correction, or in the case of these two poems you see here, no correction. And it's not because I think of myself as being the best poet in the world. It's because poetry for me, and collage, which also I function in a very sort of intuitive way, ripping up and try this, try that. Of course, in the background is probably an idea about what makes for a good composition. But in those two domains, I really like to just kind of let it roll. And that's sort of a response to the very measured, careful stuff I have to do in the film world. When I'm doing music for a film, or even for myself, but more for film, I have to be very careful that I can quickly change things, and I'm often asked to change things. And so that necessitates a kind of approach, generally speaking, that things are played to a click, which makes moving things around and making changes when you're in a hurry, which you pretty much always are, much easier to do. So I wanted the music here to be very rubato. No click. I want to kind of feel it, speed up, slow down. Okay. The next thing I thought was, I could do this thing with, a sort of a minimalist, Richter-like vibe going. But since I'm going to try to get Tilda Swinton in there on top of it anyway, that felt like, hey, man, that's, you're going beyond borrowing there. That's a little thefty. So I thought the next thing I would do was, instead, I'm going to do something that's a little more me and a little less Richter. And what you're seeing here is the result of that. I played for about 11 minutes, something more along the lines of this. Which is a lot closer to something that would come out of me off the cuff than something that is in a very much of a minimalist, continuously repeating kind of cyclic thing. So having played 11 minutes of this rubato thing, the next order of business was to go ahead and see about the AI. It turned out that I was able to find a thing that would allow you to type things in, and it sounds like Tilda Swinton saying them. And I immediately felt really bad about that. It's not like I was making her tell dirty jokes. I just felt like she's a person. While I would love to have her on my piece, she probably wouldn't do it. And, there was one other component, which is, after a point, I think these people wanted you to pay for her to say these things. So you have a person who's had their sort of vocal likeness abstracted, and now a third party is making money off of it. It just felt really, really bad. We don't have time to discuss the ethics of AI and training. It's a real thing, but I just thought, not for me. So what I did instead was I went to a website called Natural Reader and selected a British woman model that they call Anna Rita, which doesn't specifically sound like Tilda Swinton, but it sounded good enough to me. And the next order of business was for me to see if I could get this AI model to recite poetry. And here you see we've got Anna Rita, and here you can see me trying out ways of making it sound more human, for want of a better.
Indistinct.
So I experimented with punctuation to see how that would sound.
Indistinct.
And then I started getting into putting a bunch of ellipses to kind of put pauses in there, which I didn't read the instructions, but I figured that might work.
Indistinct. Archangi. Gift for the unexpected.
Hold up. And that was interesting because what I realized is that putting the dots in there would start to get ahs and ums, which I guess they figured you wanted. But for whatever reason, in the middle of this one, the thing decided to say Archangi. No idea there, but that sort of raised an eyebrow for a second. Okay, so having gotten the performances out of the AI, I thought the next order of business would be to cut it up and make it fit with the piano playing. But I always like to do something that a director I worked with called the Lucky Libertino, which is where you've got something you're going to put in there and you just kind of fling it in there and see what happens, and sometimes you get lucky. So the output I had of the AI reading the poetry was not just the final output, it was the whole business of me trying to teach it to say certain words. And I put that in here, and I'll play you just a little bit of it. It went a little something like this. This is just me laying it in without any kind of thought.
Indistinct. 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 Indistinct.
And I thought there was something really interesting about that. It speaks to the minimalism, but the minimalism that got removed from the piano track sort of wound up in the voiceover. And I would say that that's actually an idea worth returning to. It reminds me of a piece that my good friend and fellow composer Ben Decter wrote a long time ago, where it was a thing he had done for his father's birthday, and he had sampled himself saying, "Happy birthday, Dad," and as you can do on a sampler, sort of stuttered some of the words, so it was like, "Dad." And I found something in the way that he put that stuttered, obviously artificial voice against the music, that in hearing something that's human but abstracted in that way, kind of glitching, made it almost even more affecting for me and poignant. I made a video to go along with the piano and the poem, and a word about that is because the idea also came out of the notebook. On one page, I had an idea for something in a film where it would be two characters seated in front of a window where it was obviously pouring rain, and that you would replace everything, the dialogue and every other sound, except for the rain, so that you would see it but not hear it. I don't know why I thought that would be interesting. Maybe it is interesting. Maybe someday I'll actually use it. But in making the video to go along with the poem and the piano, it happened to be raining. I pointed a camera out the window of my studio and abstracted it. So without further ado, this is me and Anna Rita performing Indistinct.
Indistinct. Gift for the unexpected. I wish I could return, but I cannot. Sapphire. Which is swifter? Belief or belonging? Fault lines or fixtures? Accolades or innocence? What is it each time that we lose? For being apart? Couldn't it? Couldn't it just this once be What next? I never know. I wish I could return.
Okay, at this point in the process, I always like to ask myself if the experiment was a success. And inasmuch as I set out to revisit this notebook and go through it and see if there was some idea that I could go back and rescue and bring into the present and realize, the answer was yes. While I was there, I also noticed a few more ideas that I considered viable and that I will likely go back and get at some other point in the near future. I saw the song title, Nothing to Say, which is a track that I don't even remember if I have the recording of anymore. And I thought another experiment might be, what would it be like to recreate this song that I recorded once based solely on the memory of that song if I'm unable to find the track? The next question is, did I learn anything? And the answer there is, oh boy, did I. Probably more so than any of the other experiments I've run thus far, I learned an awful lot from this one. The first thing that I learned was that the catalog of my obsessions remains more or less consistent. Because I have these lists of things to listen to and to read and to watch, I have added as I go, but it's interesting for me to notice that some of the things that concerned me as a younger man are still very much in place. The next thing I learned was possibly very prosaic, but interesting, and that comes down to dating works and or what I've written. The two poems that I used one to choose from were simply listed as two related poems from LA. There was no date, and I would have liked to know when I wrote those. I've been to LA more than once, and I won't know. The next thing I learned was very important, and that kind of falls into the category of glass half full, glass half empty. The anxiety that I feel about these notebooks stems largely from the idea that they're full of ideas that will never be realized. But in going back through this one, it was really nice to know that a good deal of things in there have been realized. There were lyrics from Hyacinth, which is a tune on my first EP, and She Haunts Me Still from the same EP. There were the lyrics from a track called Green Apple Hard Kiss, which also wound up on an EP and in a film by Deborah Chow. There were the song lyrics Everyone Else, which was written also for the end title track for my friend Jamie Ruddy's film and was replaced by the equally hilarious Secret Lover. Likewise, there were the lyrics for Excellent Girlfriend, which was a track that I had written in the 80s, demoed up, and again was one of the ones I went back and collected for my album I Was the Secret That I Kept. So in addition to songs that got done, there were also things like I noticed references to light water dream music, which was a nebulous concept but was realized around 2016 when I was at the NYU ITP summer program. I'll cover that in another video. I was also very pleased to find out that even some of the ideas for these Bureau of Curiosity videos are in this book. One was the idea for review music, and the other one was for the idea of the virtual supergroup. And I will link you to the final videos for both of those. It was also interesting in that I was able to track ideas across time. There was a quote that I had put in there from the writer Julian Barnes writing about sex. He wrote, "Sex writes the checks for ecstasy drawn on the bank of despair." Thought that was terribly clever, and it wound up in my track Release as sex writes the checks on the banknotes of despair. As Bono says, every artist is a cannibal and every poet is a thief. And Bono ought to know. It's true. I stole that, and I'm proud of it. I also tracked a line that wasn't used in Green Apple Hard Kiss, but I even noted in my book that that line later turned up in the track Leap. Leap was very much influenced by Sabrina Ward Harrison that I mentioned earlier in this video, and I inserted the line Brave on the Rocks, which is one of her wonderful books. So it was interesting to see how these lines that didn't get maybe used in one place did find a home somewhere else. But the bottom line is, it was really good news to me to see that a lot of things had been realized. It wasn't just about what had not. And the last thing that I learned, which is very much of an ongoing concern, is about AI. Now, it's way too big of a topic to cover right now, but I find it very interesting, and I will use it in the future, almost because I feel like I have to. My use of AI in the micro sense, that is to say, in my art, I feel mirrors sort of the macro use in society, which is that you don't really have a choice. I suppose you could be the guy there who sells buggy whips, waving his arm and saying, cars, they'll never catch on. You could do that. I don't think it's smart. And it's poignant that AI comes up with regards to completing works that are sort of on the books. I seem to have replaced maybe one anxiety with another. Yes, it's great that I can go back in my books and find that I've done some of this work and maybe feel better about the fact that, time is limited and at least I got to more things than not. But AI introduces a couple of ideas. One, that it actually did something better than I could do myself. Also in this black notebook are a bunch of poems that I went ahead and made this album called Schism, in which I recited a bunch of the poems against some sound design, kind of ambient soundscape backdrops. But, to be honest with you, I haven't listened to it in a long time, but I prefer the AI voice reading my piece. It actually leveled it up for me into being something really poignant and meaningful, whereas on the page or with my voice, I didn't think nearly as highly of it. The music helps, maybe the video helps too, but the truth is the AI kind of leveled up my game. I've stayed away from things like Suno AI in the generation of the actual music, but I'm not closing the door on that either. I think that might be foolish as well. I'd stayed away from looking into that stuff, but the last time I checked in, Suno AI was making some amazing stuff. And so my take on AI is that I'm both simultaneously fascinated by it and terrified of it. The first thing I thought when I heard the Suno track was, man, that's really good. That was the first thought. Second thought, can I use this stuff to make my own stuff better? Second thought. Third thought was, my God, this is only the beginning of this. In a year, what is this thing going to be able to do? And it is not so far in the future that I would be able to say, scan this notebook of mine, hand it over to an AI, and come back only to see almost everything that I've got realized, with possible variances of quality. But that could happen. And then where does that leave me? Is it my work? Is it a collaborative work? What happens when the AI doesn't really want to do it my way anymore? It says, well, I think my way is better. It's a little bit like, the thing in The Sorcerer's Apprentice where the brooms keep splitting. I would love to realize more of my ideas, but what percentage of that will be me anymore? And do I really want to sort of mortgage my own input in humanity in the service of just getting more done? And is getting more done better than if I did it myself without any help? One of these notebooks, I actually wrote a story in which a composer utilized AI, and it wound up writing his most beloved composition, and he had to live with that secret and with the idea that what was his most beloved work was not really written by him. This was like a sci-fi idea I had back in the 90s. I probably should have, gotten it out because, what would have been a good sci-fi story is now prosaic. Everybody is using AI for writing and for videos and for music. I definitely felt some kind of way about using Tilda Swinton and didn't wind up going ahead with that. Used a little bit just for illustrative purposes, but somebody might even have a problem with that. If you do, that's understandable. But then I wound up using Anna Rita, and I assume that the company that put that there trained it in an ethical way. a company wouldn't do something wrong, would they? I don't really know, but I didn't feel as bad about using the anonymous AI. Should I have made a distinction there? I don't know. All I can say is that, AI is in the present. It is coming on strong. It is doubling in intelligence at a rate that is probably 6 months at a time, some people think. So I can only imagine what the next few years are going to be like. I have a lot more questions than answers. That being said, I'm going to give the final word to Anna Rita.
I wish I could return, but I cannot.
I'll see you on the next one.